Hello, everybody. I'm Logan Crawford, and this is the award-winning TV talk show right here on Ebru, Fresh Outlook. We begin today with controversy that is far from black and white, yet race is said to be at the very heart of a number of police-involved killings. The shooting death of Michael Brown in Missouri and the New York chokehold case. Take a look.
It's Ferguson all over again. A New York City grand jury returned no indictment against a white police officer who used a fatal chokehold on Eric Garner, an unarmed black man, on July 17th. Protest groups had planned marches if the grand jury did not charge the officers involved in the incident.
You have Eric choked in New York. You have the Michael Brown shot and killed in St. Louis. No, we marching against the chokehold. We marching against unarmed men shot down.
The incident, captured on video, fueled debates about how police use force against minorities.
Justice is justice. I mean, this is nothing but cold murder.
The police department's patrol guide bans officers from using chokeholds, saying they can be deadly.
What they did to him was wrong, because once the man started screaming, I can't breathe, it was just for you to let him go, not to keep on choking him and squeezing his head, you know?
Garner suffered a heart attack after officers compressed his neck and chest as they restrained him for selling loose cigarettes. The medical examiner ruled his death a homicide.
We are back live here on set at Fresh Outlook. I am joined by the Ebru think tank, Yohuru Williams, history professor at Fairfield University, Bob Brown, an attorney and former police officer, Thomas Prusa, an economics professor at Rutgers University, and joining us via Skype is Michael Datcher, author of the New York Times bestseller, Raising Fences. Yohuru, I'm going to start with you. Talking about Eric Garner, a man who was apparently put in a chokehold or a headlock, pushed to the ground, screamed out he couldn't breathe multiple times, later died. I'm outraged by it. I'm outraged by the video. I'm also outraged by the fact that we're marginalizing this issue by making it an issue of black and white. It's excessive force that any one of us could deal with at any time. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with you, but the problem is that the cases that we see are disproportionately involve African Americans and unarmed African Americans in the last couple of years. The thing that's disturbing for me is that the New York City police had a protocol against chokeholds, against the application of this very lethal use of force. That goes back to 1985. It was amended in 1993 to say under no certain circumstances was that hold to be used, and yet we're looking at that in the video and no indictment. Very disturbing.
Disturbing to many people. It has sparked protests across America. Bob Brown, you're a police officer in your past life. Currently, you're an attorney. You were actually shot in the line of duty. Tell me your thoughts about the failure of a grand jury to indict the police officer who was responsible, it seems, for Eric Garner's death.
Well, I can tell you is like in New Jersey, they would put 23 people on a grand jury, and you would need 12 votes out of 23 to present an indictment. But a grand jury is not something where it's guilty or not guilty. Is there enough evidence to proceed to trial to determine guilt or innocence by another jury called a petit jury?
But with that videotape, it seems to us lay people that there is enough evidence. A man died, and it looks as though a police officer used an illegal maneuver.
Well, it depends about how they present it to the grand jury.
Now, and that's what a lot of people are angry about.
And that would be one where I believe it was Justice Walker said from New York that you can indict a ham sandwich.
Exactly.
So if you look at it that way,
wanted to push for an indictment, they could have gotten it.
It looks like that, but again, you're dealing with Staten Island, which is a predominantly white area of New York City, of the 5 boroughs. You take a look at the officer jumping on the top of the person, and then all of a sudden all the other officers come on top. Now they were looking at the intent. What was the intent? The intent basically was to subdue and arrest.
Let me stop you there for a second. I want to talk a little bit about intent, and we'll talk to Tom Prusa about that. Why are we met with 9mm force when we're talking on a cell phone, not wearing a seatbelt, or selling loosies on the street, which is a loose cigarette?
Right. That's one of the, I think there are two aspects here that the segment didn't cover. One is what we're seeing here in the last week that's been highlighted is the country has a serious issue with mass incarceration of blacks, in particular black males. It's a huge problem for our country.
And they're criminalized for things like smoking marijuana, which is now
again,
legal
let's just
in
try.
2
This
states.
man died over, there was not a violent crime. This man was selling loose cigarettes on the street. And so there's one overarching theme that we have to deal with as a country is this the right approach towards crime? And it turns out there is a racial component to it. We're not saying that people are racist, but just look at the statistics. There's mass incarceration of minorities in this
nobody's
country.
using an epithet, but there is race involved. Let's turn now to Skype and talk to Michael Datcher just a bit. Michael, you've been following the case, I'm sure, in Staten Island, where a chokehold appears to have been used. And of course, you have written extensively on the situation in Ferguson, Missouri. Tell me your thoughts about this. Is this a case of white officers targeting black men?
What you find is it's a case of anti-blackness. When these officers are encountering these black men, what they're really encountering is the trope of blackness. So when Trayvon Martin was accosted, for example, his accoster wasn't encountering a teenage boy, he was encountering kind of the trope of blackness and a constellation of experiential energy rooted in cultural beliefs about black men. So Trayvon becomes the black boogeyman, Eric Garner becomes the black boogeyman. Brown becomes the black boogeyman. And when police officers are encountering the boogeyman, they're using boogeyman-like force. And that's the issue. If it was a young white woman who was selling loose cigarettes, if it was a young white male who was walking down the street with a bag of Skittles, that person does not end up dead in this situation. So the issue is an issue of anti-blackness, which is global, especially here in America with such a high rate of incarceration among black men.
What do you think about the question I posed to Tom just a short while ago? Why are ordinary people like you and me encountering 9mm force when we engage in behavior that is perhaps criminal, perhaps violating civil laws by not wearing a seatbelt or talking on a cell phone or selling loose cigarettes?
Listen, to be fair, these officers are just people as well, who have families, who have children, who have friends, who have experiences. And in our country, we have an issue with race and racism. Most folks who are not African American do not have close, intimate relations with African American people. And so what they're dealing with is, again, this trope of blackness, this kind of idea that black people are somehow not the same as them. They are scary and dangerous. And so when you encounter an officer who's stopping you for selling loose cigarettes, that is so absurd that he would think he would need to use a gun or a chokehold to subdue you is ludicrous. But that's an example of how race operates in our country.
Yohuru, let me turn to you just a little bit. Often you see the aggressive cop who is black against a black suspect. So it's not just white cops against black suspects, it's also black cops against black suspects. It tends to be a cultural problem where that the police officers tend to identify with the white police officer's mindset, it seems.
It's a culture of violence that people associate with the police. And the problem is, as Tom mentioned, that you have police occupying territory as if they're occupying military space. You have the criminalization, literally, of urban space. The idea that people in the middle of the afternoon can't be out walking about, can't be in certain areas without inviting suspicion. Stop and frisk in New York City is a very good example of that. What we saw in St. Louis is another very good example of that. So young people of color are growing up in a society in which they're told consistently, you're not supposed to be here. And the police are going to enforce this with massive force. I think that the lesson that they're getting is very troubling and very dangerous. And we have to be concerned as a society, which is one of the reasons I'm so happy with the protests and where they've been directed.
Bob, what do you make of President Obama's proposals to wear body cameras and as a chance to document what the police are doing?
Well, the only thing is the body camera might have helped in the Ferguson, because apparently words were exchanged between a police officer and a pedestrian walking in the street. Now, we saw the cameras, what happened in Staten Island.
It made no difference.
It made no difference because you still had the action. But the one thing I like to point out with Ferguson and as well as Staten Island, you never had the experienced older cop on the beat. You didn't see that there in either one of these things. What you're seeing is the older officer leaves. Now, you get a guy on 15, 20 years, he has that family. He's going to be concerned more about, hey, it's a working guy. Why am I going to write him a ticket? Why should I bust his chops?
Right.
The younger cops, the younger bulls, they need to learn. And unfortunately, that's what you take a look at the Garner tape, Staten Island. Most of them are young officers. The sergeant that responded to the scene was a younger female officer. So you didn't have that experience.
Right.
You know, who cares about the Lucy's? Who cares about the person on the phone sometimes?
Right.
You know, the older guys that, it slided off his back. Yeah. They could deal probably more with the cultural aspect in it.
And part of it is that the police officers in New York City start out as rookies. They take their experience and go to the suburbs where they're better paid.
Well, not only that, but then again, you got to realize that the Lucy's, that's what they call the black window aspect of trying to clean up graffiti, crime on the street. That came from up above. That didn't just come from a patrolman. That came from police administration.
And let me turn to Tom about that. There is an economic proponent of this where people say that he was actually killed by an economic chokehold, in that by having Michael Bloomberg impose unbelievable taxes on cigarettes, that poor people can only afford to buy one cigarette at a time.
Yeah, so to me that's preposterous. So again,
but aren't you creating a black market by taxing a $5 pack of cigarettes by another $10?
There's all sorts of items, things that we buy are taxed, and we as a society have decided that cigarettes are very costly to society, and that people who smoke cigarettes will get cancer. And so we can't decide that consequence and the fact that we want to tax it justifies the use of violence, and in this case the chokehold on Eric Garner. Making this an issue about taxes is making a very small point. The fact that cigarettes are taxed heavily is a decision we made as a society, that this is a product we don't want to encourage the consumption of.
Let's turn to Michael Datcher joining us via Skype. Michael, tell me about where do we go from here? Can we see police officers using less lethal force, such as tasers? Do we see that police officers are retrained to deal more sensitively with different communities? And do we see that more senior officers are assigned to the beat to make sure that they know how to deal with so-called criminal suspects?
Right. First, being a cop is a very difficult job, and there are good cops out there. And this is not simply a cop issue. This is a societal issue. Cops are real people who went to real schools, who have real friends. We've got to deal with race as a society. It'll take a much longer time to get things solved, but we have to deal with race as a holistic approach. In the short term, I think it's really important that there be an amazing amount of sensitivity training for officers who work in minority communities. We have to get cops to see people who are not like them, who are black for them.
All right, Michael, you're having a little transmission problem, but your thought is well taken. We're going to actually get final thoughts now on this issue. Yohuru, what are your final thoughts on the Eric Garner case and the Michael Brown case?
I echo Michael. It's interesting because it is a criminal justice problem. We cannot continue to police space in this way. We can't continue to see police officers looking like they're occupying a foreign city rather than an American city. And we really can't continue to warehouse human beings in this way. That's what's bankrupting our nation. So in a lot of ways, what we're seeing in both Staten Island and in Ferguson, Missouri, is an indication of where we are in terms of criminal justice. There's a racial component to it. It is strong. It needs to be addressed. But the underlying issue of how we deal with crime in this country has to be addressed as well.
Bob Brown, final thought?
Well, the hard part is that I think that one solution would be is teaming up the younger officers with the veteran officers. The other part is the training. You know, when you do make an arrest, if somebody is having problems, get the first aid. Here we saw something where they put an auction on him, maybe took the cuffs off, did something to assist him. He might be living today, who knows?
Tom Prusa, final thought.
You know, I think for this, to me, it strikes me as it's really sad that we have to have these tragedies to bring our country together. So I think these things are what we've observed in the last few months. And if you go back to Trayvon Martin, these cases are so sad for our country. It's one of the few things that seems that binds us together. I think we all recognize, regardless of color, that there's a problem here. And that little nugget is the hope that something good could come out of this.
A lot of hope there, a lot of pent-up rage as well. Bob Brown, thank you for joining us to discuss this issue today. He is an attorney who is based here in New Jersey. When we return, Russia on the ropes, dropping oil prices and Western sanctions could be the 1-2 punches that sees the former Soviet state hit the canvas economically when we come back.